The proposal yesterday, the declaration on December the 27th to hold talks on Slovak soil by Juraj Blanar, signals a possible breakthrough in diplomatic engagement between the EU, NATO, and Russia, except, of course, that this was on the back of a visit by the Slovak Premier in defiance of EU unity and integrity. Slovakia, of course, a NATO and EU member, proposed to host peace talks in its pivot towards a more pro-Russian stance under Prime Minister Robert Fico. And this needs to be contextualized in the instance of Slovakia as a rare example of European neutrality acceptable to both Russia and the West, and the emphasis on including all parties, a criticism of past efforts like the Swiss summit that excluded Russia, and Bratislava's shift under Fico, no military aid to Ukraine, and maintaining Russian gas supplies reflects a divergence from broader EU policy, or indeed a complete contempt for broader EU policy. Putin's praise, therefore, of Slovakia's neutral position is, for him, an acceptable platform for dialogue. I think Slovakia's position is extraordinarily questionable.
Меня зовут Вованом, но кличут Питер Путин. Или кричат мне Путин хуло. Это отлично похоже называли цара. Я ответственен за СВО и катастрофы на фронте. Я сам занимаюсь всем, даже своими кишками. Люблю все контролировать, даже своего друга Алексея. Все скажем Путин хуло!
I thought that might put things into perspective. I've done quite a lot of videos of Mr. Putin, and Putin's praise for Fico is as absurd as his statements on anything else. The potential role of Slovakia as a convenient mediator for Russia, I think, would simply meet with European and global skepticism. Kyiv's strong position, or a strong opposition to Fico's Moscow visit on December the 22nd, calling it a security issue for Europe, is I think probably where that remains. It's a blip and an absurdity. It's not the only one, of course. Oban is another, but Ukraine's doubts about Slovakia's neutrality, given its hold in military support and closer ties to Russia, is perfectly reasonable. President Zelensky's sharp criticism of Fico's dependence on Moscow is reasonable. The world picture, the global picture, with Trump's upcoming presidency, his pledges to prioritize peace negotiations, appointing Keith Kellogg as a special envoy, and the juxtaposition of Kellogg's proposed terms, that is, freezing the front line, lifting sanctions, suspending NATO accession for Ukraine, all of these are positive things. Suspending, not cancelling NATO's accession for Ukraine, and promising to continue U.S. military aid under Trump's administration. This is a positive scenario. Slovakia's positioning as a bridge in the middle of these shifting alliances is an unnecessary piece of equipment, as indeed I suspect is Mr. Fico himself. Slovakia's credibility as a host, given its NATO membership, given its economic ties to Russia, on paper looks perfectly reasonable, but the complexity of negotiations when Russia and Ukraine maintain maximalist goals, when Russia's territorial ambitions versus Ukraine's insistence on sovereignty and justice for war crimes, I don't understand how anybody can possibly take Russia seriously. Given the fact that Russia is the aggressor, Russia invaded with no provocation. The role of external actors like the US and the EU in shaping the outcome of any talks is important. But I don't think there's room for Fico in that unless he is part of the EU. And if he wishes to act alone, he's a loose cannon. If successful, Slovakia could position itself as a diplomatic power broker in Europe, but I don't think that's going to be likely. The power broker will be Kellogg and will be Trump, and that will be independent of Fico. Fico's got to this game too late, and I don't think he's likely to salvage his oil pipeline either. Slovakia is pursuing a foolish policy under this absurd prime minister. But I understand how necessity dictates policy, and I understand how threatening and worrying it can be to be in the hands of President Putin, the icy hands of President Putin, who of course is living in a fridge, probably dead, probably not living at all. Rather like, I think of Putin rather like Schrödinger's cat, just in case anyone is in any doubt. Until one opens the fridge, whether that happens to be an underground bunker or an actual fridge, doesn't really make any difference. Until one opens that door, Putin is both alive and dead, fully alive and fully dead. And I intend quite happily to treat the matter in that way. I will quite happily talk about Putin's death in October 2023, as reported, and I will quite happily talk about Putin as alive, because we see him on many occasions. What we may be seeing is doppelgangers. What we may be seeing is somebody very well rehearsed in a script, or following cue cards, or a what is it? The thing you read from, teleprompter. But whoever is doing that job is very good, is very convincing, but not completely convincing. And I am partly entertained by the audacity of Steve Rosenberg in Moscow, asking outrageous questions last year and this year. But would he really do that if that were the real Putin? Somehow I think not. I think he is as much aware of the probability that this is a fake as I am. But it's only a fake insofar as we can't prove it. We can't prove it until that door is opened. So until that point, this is Schrödinger's Putin, Schrödinger's cat, Putin by another name.